Get ready for an exciting ride. In the very first into Season 1, Episode 1 of Breaking Bad. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more awesome recaps. We meet Walter White is a 50-year-old high school chemistry teacher living in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He lives with his pregnant wife Skylar and their teenage son Walter Jr., who has cerebral palsy. To make extra money, Walt works part-time at a local car wash, but this often leads to embarrassing situations, like being humiliated in front of his own students. On his 50th birthday, Walt comes home to a surprise party set up by Skylar. The next day, while working at the car wash, he suddenly collapses and is rushed to the hospital. There, the doctors deliver terrible news. Walt has inoperable lung cancer and may only have 2 years left to live. Walt decides to keep this heartbreaking secret from his family, including Skylar's sister, Marie, and her husband, Hank, who works as a DEA agent. After going back to work at the car wash, Walt suddenly gets angry, yells at his boss, and quits his job. Earlier, he had seen a news report about a big pile of money that was found in one of Hank's drug busts. This gives Walt an idea, so he decides to take up Hank's old offer to go along on a ride-along when Hank and his partner, Stephen Gomez, raid a known meth lab. While the DEA agents search the house, Walt spots his former student, Jesse Pinkman, sneaking out a back window. Later, Walt finds Jesse's address and blackmails him into helping make crystal meth, but he doesn't say why. Walt gives Jesse his life savings to buy an RV, which they plan to use as a mobile lab. Walt even steals supplies from the high school chemistry lab to get what they need for cooking the meth. Walt and Jesse drive the RV out into the desert and start cooking meth. Thanks to Walt's skills in chemistry, they make a batch that Jesse says is the purest he's ever seen. Jesse takes some of it back to town to show to his distributor, Crazy 8 Molina. However, Jesse quickly realizes that Crazy 8 is the cousin of Emilio Koyama, Jesse's partner, who got caught in the earlier raid and is now out on bail. Emilio thinks Jesse abandoned him, but Jesse tries to prove he's still loyal by driving them to the RV. When they meet Walt, Emilio recognizes him from the raid and assumes Walt is a police informant. Emilio and Crazy 8 then hold Walt and Jesse at gunpoint. Jesse tries to escape, but he trips, hits his head on a rock, and knocks himself out. Walt, trying to save himself, offers to show them how he made the meth. As Emilio and Crazy 8 watch Walt inside the RV, Emilio carelessly flicks a cigarette outside, which starts a small fire. Walt takes this chance and surprises them by creating a cloud of deadly phosphine gas. He quickly escapes the RV and shuts the door, trapping Emilio and Crazy 8 inside until they pass out from the gas. Hearing sirens in the distance, Walt quickly puts on a gas mask and places another on Jesse before pulling him into the passenger seat of the RV, which is still filled with dangerous phosphine fumes. Walt drives away in a panic to escape the spreading brush fire. Just like the scenes shown at the start of the episode, Walt ends up driving the RV into a ditch. He stumbles out of the vehicle and tosses his gas mask aside. Thinking the police are about to catch him, Walt records a video message for his family. Feeling trapped, he tries to shoot himself with a pistol, not realizing that the safety is still on. As the sirens get closer, Walt feels relieved when he sees they are just fire engines heading to put out the brush fire, so he quickly hides his weapon. Jesse wakes up and joins Walt as they watch the fire truck speed past. A Native American man with a front-end loader helps pull the RV out of the ditch, and then Walt and Jesse drive back to town, making sure Emilio and Crazy 8 are tied up in the RV. They leave the RV at Jesse's house and go their separate ways. Later that night, Walt comes home and surprises his wife with a burst of energy and passion, leaving her to ask in shock, "Walt, is that you?" Walt and Jesse bring their RV back to Jesse's house, which once belonged to Jesse's aunt. Walt wants this to be their first and last time cooking meth, and he tells Jesse they will go their separate ways after. But when they open the RV to take care of the two bodies inside, they see that one of them, Crazy 8, is still alive. After parking the RV, Walt goes home, where he has a passionate night with his wife. The next morning, Jesse calls Walt in a panic because Crazy 8 is still breathing and locked up in the RV. Walt says he'll come after work and picks up some hydrofluoric acid. Meanwhile, Crazy 8 escapes from the RV, but Walt finds him on the street. Crazy 8 knocks himself out trying to run away, so Walt puts him in his car and heads back to Jesse's house. The knocked out Crazy 8 is taken to the basement, where they lock him to a pole with a bike lock around his neck. Walt says they should use a special acid to make Emilio's body disappear, leaving no evidence. Walt and Jesse need to get rid of the body and take care of Crazy 8, so they flip a coin to see who will do what. Jesse wins and picks the job of getting rid of the body, leaving Walt with the task of dealing with Crazy 8. Walt tells Jesse to buy a plastic bin made from a special material to dissolve the body, but Jesse can't find one big enough to fit the whole body. Meanwhile, Walt thinks about suffocating Crazy 8 but can't make himself do it because he doesn't want to kill another person. Instead, he gives Crazy 8 water, food, and bathroom supplies. When Jesse comes home and asks how things went with Crazy 8, Walt promises to handle it the next day and then goes home. Meanwhile, Skylar starts to feel like Walt is hiding something from her. She uses the internet to look up the phone number that called Walt during breakfast. Skylar finds out from Jesse's website that he is a drug dealer and involved with older women, even though she doesn't know what that means. Walt and Skylar go to an ultrasound appointment and find out they're having a baby girl. Skylar asks Walt about Jesse because Walt acted strangely during the phone call. Walt lies, saying that Jesse sells him marijuana to help with his cancer pain. Later, Skylar shows up at Jesse's house while he's trying to move Emilio's body from the RV into the house. She warns Jesse that her brother-in-law is a DEA agent, but she doesn't even notice the body partly hidden behind Jesse's car. Jesse can't find the special plastic bin that Walt told him to use, so he decides to dissolve the body in his bathtub instead. But the acid dissolves the bathtub, along with the body, and the ceiling below it collapses. Emilio's liquefied remains fall through the ceiling. Walt explains to Jesse that hydrofluoric acid can dissolve anything except plastic. Meanwhile, out in the desert, two Native American kids are playing and find Walt's gas mask. Walt and Jesse clean up the messy remains of Emilio's body, flushing it down the toilet one bucket at a time. Meanwhile, Crazy 8 wakes up in the basement. As Walt talks to Crazy 8, he learns that Jesse spilled all kinds of personal information to Crazy 8 and Emilio, like how Walt is a high school chemistry teacher and that he has a son with special needs. Crazy 8 tells Walt that Jesse isn't someone he can trust since he blabbed about Walt to everyone. He gives Walt an ultimatum: either let him go or kill him. Walt then goes to Jesse, who is in the middle of getting high on meth. Angry, Walt tries to flush away the batch of meth worth $40,000, but Jesse stops him as Walt gets out of breath because of his lung cancer. Jesse yells at Walt for not keeping his end of the deal and then drives off in frustration. Meanwhile, Skylar tells Marie that she is writing a new short story with a character who smokes a lot. She asks Marie about marijuana. Marie assumes that Skylar thinks Walt Jr. is using pot, but Skylar insists she's just asking for her story. Marie asks Hank to scare Walt Jr. into staying away from drugs, so Hank takes him to a motel and shows him how meth has ruined a woman's teeth. It turns out Jesse was hiding in the room of that woman while she was being questioned by Hank outside, making Jesse paranoid that the cops are already after him. Meanwhile, it is revealed that Marie has a problem with stealing. She takes a pair of fancy high heels from an expensive store without paying. Walt calls Skylar to apologize for being late, but he lies and says he's working at the car wash. Skylar tells Walt she knows he quit that job 2 weeks ago and angrily tells him not to come home. Walt thinks hard about whether he should kill Crazy 8 or not. While bringing Crazy 8 a sandwich, Walt collapses on the basement floor and drops the plate, shattering it. After waking up, Walt tells Crazy 8 that he has lung cancer. As they talk, Walt seems to form a bond with Crazy 8, who reveals his real name is Domingo. Walt admits he's looking for any reason not to kill him. Crazy 8 promises he won't come after Walt if he is set free. Crazy 8 says he grew up in town, has a degree in business management, and his dad owns a furniture shop that Walt knows well. Walt remembers buying a bassinet there when his son was born. Deciding to let him go, Walt shares a beer with him and admits he's cooking meth to leave some money for his family before he dies. Walt goes to get the key to the bike lock holding Crazy 8 captive, but when Walt throws the beer can in the trash, he notices the broken pieces of the plate. He realizes that one sharp piece is missing. Understanding that Crazy 8 plans to attack him, Walt reluctantly chokes Crazy 8 with the bike lock while Crazy 8 tries to stab him in the leg with the broken plate. Afterward, Walt goes home and finds Skylar sitting on the bed, crying. He tells her he has something to say. Meanwhile, Hank and several DEA agents find the place in the desert where the meth was made, along with Crazy 8's car. Inside the car, they discover a small bag of the meth that Walt cooked. A Native American family shares the gas mask that a young girl found earlier. It is revealed that Crazy 8 was secretly working undercover for Hank. Hank and his DEA team have a meeting about Emilio and Crazy 8, who are both missing. It turns out Crazy 8 was their secret informant. Hank also talks about finding meth that's 99.15% pure, which is the purest ever seen. He thinks this meth could make someone in Albuquerque the new meth kingpin, not knowing it's actually Walt. At a family barbecue, Walt tells Hank, Marie, and Walt Jr. that he has cancer. He had already told Skylar. Walt uses his illness as an excuse for his odd behavior with Skylar. Marie sets up a meeting with the best cancer doctor, but they need money for the treatment. Walt doesn't want to borrow money from Hank or his mom. Meanwhile, Jesse tries Walt's meth with two friends. The next morning, he runs away from his house after thinking that two people at his door are armed bikers. Marie sets up an appointment with one of the best cancer doctors in the country, even though the family can't afford him. Walt says he will use his pension money to pay, but he actually uses some of the cash he got from Crazy 8 in the desert. He keeps this money hidden in an air conditioning vent at his house. Walt Jr. gets upset with his dad for acting strange and calm about his cancer. When Walt goes to the credit union to turn the cash into a check, a rich, rude man named Ken takes his parking spot. Ken annoys Walt and everyone else by talking loudly on his cell phone. Jesse runs away to his wealthy parents' house, where he sleeps for a whole day. He tries to connect with his smart little brother, Jake. That night, one of Jesse's friends who tried Walt's meth calls him. The friend says he knows rich people who want to buy drugs and will pay a lot of money for the high-quality meth Jesse made. The next day, Jesse goes to see Walt to check in, but Walt kicks him out. Jesse then quickly gives Walt his half of the meth money, $4,000. It looks like their partnership is over. Later, the cancer doctor tells Walt that the cancer has spread to his lymph nodes, but there is still a chance it can be treated with chemotherapy. At home, Walt shares his doubts about the chemo because it will cost $90,000. He worries that if he dies anyway, he'll leave his family with a lot of debt. Walt Jr. gets angry at his dad and says he might as well die if he's going to give up so easily. Meanwhile, at Jesse's house, a housekeeper finds a joint in his room and his parents kick him out, but the joint actually belongs to his little brother Jake, who thanks Jesse for taking the blame. While Jesse waits outside for a ride, Jake comes out and asks for his joint back. Jesse throws it on the ground and stomps on it. Walt has a bad coughing fit while driving and even coughs up blood. He pulls into a gas station and spots Ken, the rude guy from before, parking his car. When Ken leaves his car unattended, a very angry Walt grabs a squeegee, opens Ken's car hood, and uses it to mess with the battery. The engine overheats, and the car suddenly explodes as Walt calmly walks back to his own car. He drives away, leaving Ken shocked and upset. Walt and Skylar go to a birthday party for their rich friend, Elliot Schwartz. A long time ago, Walt and his girlfriend Gretchen started a company called Gray Matter Technologies with Elliot. They chose the name Gray Matter because it was a mix of their last names, White and Schwartz, which means black in German. But Walt decided to sell his part of the company. After Walt left, the company became very successful because of his ideas, and Elliot ended up marrying Gretchen. Walt feels uneasy at the birthday party because of this complicated past. However, Elliot is kind to Walt and tries hard to make him feel welcome. When Elliot offers him a job and mentions that the company has great health insurance, Walt realizes that Skylar told Elliot about his cancer. This makes Walt angry because he doesn't like her sharing his personal problems with people who aren't part of their lives anymore. Walt turns down the job, and when Elliot offers to pay for his treatment, Walt finds it insulting. Jesse has a bad job interview. He is only being considered for very basic jobs, like standing outside as a human sign, even though he has an education and good experience in sales. After the interview, Jesse meets his friend Badger outside the office. Badger asks for some of the pure meth that Jesse used to have, but Jesse tells him it's all gone and that he had a big argument with his partner, who was the one making the meth. Badger then says he can get a lot of pseudo, which is a main ingredient needed to make meth. Jesse shows his friend Badger the RV that he and Walt use as a meth lab. Jesse and Badger decide to try making a batch of meth on their own. Out in the desert, Jesse gets frustrated because he can't make meth as good as Walt. Their batch looks cloudy, while Walt's meth was always clear like glass. Jesse gets so mad that he throws his own product away, which makes Badger really upset. Badger thinks the meth is good enough to sell. Jesse tries cooking a few more batches, but he ends up throwing those away too. Badger and Jesse get into a fight over the meth, and Jesse pushes Badger out of the RV and drives off. Over the weekend, Walt Jr. and two friends are outside a convenience store, waiting for someone to buy them beer. The friends run away when Walt Jr. goes up to a random person, who turns out to be an off-duty cop. The cop gives him his first and last warning, and calls Hank, who Walt Jr. calls his father. Skylar decides to hold a family meeting to talk about why Walt is refusing treatment. Walt Jr. is upset and says it feels like Walt is giving up, and he worries Walt might give up on him in the future. Hank, Walt Jr., and Marie argue about what Walt should do. While Skylar and Walt Jr. want him to get the treatment, Marie, and later Hank, think Walt should have the choice to say no if he wants. Walt ends the meeting by saying he will not do the treatment. The next morning, Walt changes his mind and tells Skylar he will do the treatment, and he will handle Elliot's check that was given for his treatment. Later, Gretchen calls and says Walt must take the money. Walt thanks her for the offer, but lies, saying his insurance will now cover the costs. It's also hinted that Gretchen and Walt used to be in a relationship a long time ago. After that, Walt goes to Jesse's house and asks him if he wants to cook meth with him again. Walt and Jesse make a deal. Walt will cook the meth and be a quiet partner, while Jesse will sell it on the street. Walt also insists that there will be no more violence. At the same time, Walt is still going through chemotherapy. He tells Skylar that Elliot's check arrived and that he deposited it, but in reality, he's having trouble paying for his treatment and plans to use meth money to cover it. During a family counseling session, Skylar worries about Walt's missing hours. Walt says he just enjoys being alone and taking walks. While making meth, Walter gets hot flashes and feels very dizzy, so he has to sit down to rest. Jesse sees a burn on Walt's chest and understands that Walt is is trying to take care of his family before he dies from lung cancer. Jesse finishes their batch of meth and spends all night selling it. He brings Walt $1,300, which is much less than Walt hoped for. Jesse explains that he only managed to sell a small amount in one night. Jesse says they need a distributor if they want to make more money, because only distributors can sell a lot of meth quickly. After Crazy 8 died, Tuco Salamanca has taken over his area. Jesse gets a meeting with Tuco by having his friend Skinny Pete, who was in prison with Tuco, vouch for him. Even though Tuco agrees to pay $35,000 for a pound of meth, he insists on paying only after his dealers sell it. When Jesse refuses, Tuco beats him up badly, and Jesse ends up in the hospital. Meanwhile, Hank traces the gas mask found in the desert to Walt's high school. Hank and Walt check the chemistry lab and notice some equipment is missing, which makes Hank think a student might have gotten hold of the lab key. Walt also finds out that Crazy 8 was working undercover for Hank. Later, Hank arrests a school janitor named Hugo, who had the keys and a past drug record. Walt feels bad about Hugo getting in trouble and tries to reach out to Jesse, only to find out Jesse is in the hospital. Walt visits Jesse and finds out what happened with Tuco. Walt, starting to lose his hair from chemotherapy, decides to shave off the rest. Then, he sets up a meeting with Tuco using the name Heisenberg. He demands $50,000 from Tuco, $35,000 for the meth Tuco took from Jesse, and $15,000 for Jesse's treatment. Seeing Walt with another bag, Tuco thinks Walt is bluffing and threatens him. Walt throws a piece of the material from the bag onto the floor, causing a big explosion. The force shakes the entire floor, blows out the windows, and knocks everyone down. Walt reveals that the bag has fulminated mercury in it and threatens to smash the whole bag. Tuco gives in and agrees to pay the $50,000 and buys meth for the next week, offering $35,000 for 1 pound. Walt insists that Tuco buy 2 pounds a week for $70,000. Tuco is surprised but agrees. Impressed by Walt's bold move, Tuco decides to work with him. Walt leaves the building and once in his car, feels a strong rush from what he has just done. Principal Molina gets involved when some chemistry stuff goes missing at school. At a PTA meeting, Walt and Skylar have a secret moment under the table, and later, they have a passionate encounter in Walt's car. Walt is starting to enjoy the thrill of the risk. Jesse, who is now living in the RV, decides to sell his house because he can't handle the memories of his past losses. Walt tells Jesse about a new deal, but Jesse is worried because making 2 pounds of meth a week is too hard. His suppliers, the Smurfs, can only provide a limited amount of the ingredients needed. Walt and Jesse are having trouble making the big amount of meth they promised to Tuco. The problem is that they need a lot of pseudoephedrine, which Jesse can only buy in small boxes from the drugstore. They promised Tuco 2 pounds of meth, but only delivered half a pound. Tuco is very angry and pays Walt only $17,000. He gives Walt another chance next week, but Walt still wants the $70,000 Tuco promised. Walt asks Tuco to see this as an investment that will be worth it soon. Tuco agrees to give Walt $52,500 now, with 25% interest each week. By next week, the total will be $65,625 with interest, but Tuco warns Walt of serious trouble if he doesn't meet the next goal. Walt must deliver 1.875 pounds of meth to cover the advance payment. To make up for it, Walt promises to bring 4 pounds of meth to the next meeting. At Skylar's baby shower, Marie gives her a fancy baby tiara made of white gold. This makes Hank seem upset. Outside, Walt and Hank talk about what is right and wrong between legal and illegal actions. That night, Walt tells Skylar he's going to a special health clinic for a weekend because she wants to try different treatments. But Walt is actually making meth with Jesse. Skylar tries to return the tiara, but gets stopped in the store because Marie stole it, and Skylar matches the description of the thief. She pretends she's going into labor to get out of trouble. Later, Skylar talks to Marie about the stolen tiara, but Marie denies taking it calmly. Walt has a new plan to make meth using different ingredients and gives Jesse a list of what he needs, paid for by Tuco. Jesse gets almost everything except methylamine, which is hard to get. Jesse knows of a warehouse where people are willing to steal and sell methylamine for $10,000. Walt decides they should steal it themselves, using aluminum powder from Etch-a-Sketches to make thermite. At night, Walt and Jesse sneak into the warehouse, lock a security guard in a portable toilet, and use thermite to melt a locked door. They take a whole drum of methylamine and get away. The next day, Walt and Jesse try to start the RV, but it won't work. With a deadline coming up, they decide to cook meth in Jesse's basement. They don't know that Jesse's realtor is planning to show the house to potential buyers that afternoon. Jesse stands by the basement door to keep people out while Walt works with the chemicals. When someone asks to see the basement, Jesse tells everyone to leave. When Walt gets home, he finds out about Marie's theft and wonders if Skylar might ever report him for a crime. At their next meeting, Walt gives Tuco 4.6 pounds of meth. Even though it is blue, it is still good quality, and Tuco gives Walt $91,000. One of Tuco's men makes a rude comment to Walt, and Tuco gets so angry angry that he hits the man until he falls unconscious. As Tuco drives away, Walt and Jesse look at each other surprised. The comment made it seem like they didn't know they were working for Tuco, and Tuco did not like that at all. To be continued. Make sure you don't miss what happens next. Hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell to stay tuned.